They laughed at her. They called her just a kid. But when the storm came and lives were on the line, she fired 12 shots in 8 minutes and proved every single one of them wrong. Have you ever been underestimated your whole life? Imagine being told you're too small, too weak, too young, and then one moment arrives, a moment where everything depends on you. Today's story is about a young girl who silenced every doubt with courage, discipline, and 12 perfect shots. But before we begin, if you love stories of real human courage and resilience, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. They laughed at her. They whispered behind her back. To them, Emily Carter was nothing more than a fragile, ordinary girl. Too young, too naive, too soft for the real world. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. Emily grew up in a small town in North Carolina. Her father, John Carter, was a Marine sniper. Her mother, Sarah, a nurse. While other kids played games, Emily spent her evenings at the shooting range with her father. At just 11, she hit her first bullseye. At 13, she could strip and reassemble a sniper rifle faster than most recruits. By 15, she was more focused than men twice her age, but no one believed in her. At school, classmates laughed. At the base where her father worked, soldiers dismissed her with a smirk. She's just a kid. One night, sitting on the porch with her father, Emily asked quietly, "Do you think I'll ever be good enough? Not for you, but for them." Her father looked at her, voice steady but heavy with truth. "One day, life will put you in a place where you'll have no choice but to act. And when that day comes, trust yourself. You'll know what to do." Emily wanted to believe him, but the whispers, just a kid, echoed louder than his words. Weeks later, that quiet base became a battlefield. It was a Friday evening. The sky glowed orange. Soldiers laughed near the mess hall, and Emily was sketching rifles in her notebook. Then, at exactly 21:47 hours, the siren wailed. A piercing alarm shook the night. Perimeter breach. East side. Get to cover. Now. A deafening explosion ripped through the base. The east gate was hit. Smoke filled the air. Bullets cracked. Soldiers scrambled for cover. Emily froze, heart pounding, as her father sprinted past with his rifle. "Stay down, Emily. Don't move until I come back." But this wasn't a drill. This was real. Snipers pinned down the yard. Men were falling. A medic dragged a bleeding sergeant past her. The colonel barked orders, but panic was spreading. The base was understaffed, unprepared, and breaking apart. Emily pressed her hands against her ears, whispering to herself, "Don't. You're not a soldier. You're just a kid." And yet, she saw their fear. She saw grown men, trained soldiers, frozen under fire. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. If she didn't act, more would die. Slowly, Emily stood. She walked into the storage tent, dropped her notebook, and opened the weapons locker. Her father's old sniper rifle waited inside, cold, heavy, unyielding. This wasn't a game. This wasn't practice. This was the moment her father had warned her about. With trembling hands, Emily lifted the rifle. And as explosions tore through the night, the girl they once dismissed as just a kid stepped forward. Into history, the night was chaos. Smoke covered the base. The sound of gunfire echoed like thunder. Soldiers were pinned down, unable to move. Snipers hidden in the tree line cut down anyone who dared to raise their head. Emily lay flat behind the sandbags. Her father's rifle pressed against her chest. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought the enemy could hear it. Her hands trembled, not from the weight of the rifle, but from the weight of the choice before her. She had never fired at a human being. Targets, yes. Cans on a fence post, yes. But a living enemy, never. Yet, as she looked out across the yard, she saw them soldiers bleeding, calling for help. Terrified men who moments earlier had laughed at her. She saw a young private, barely 20 years old, frozen in fear, whispering for his mother. And in that instant, Emily understood. If she didn't take the shot, more would die. She pulled the bolt, chambered the first round, and pressed her cheek against the stock. Her world narrowed to the scope. One circle of clarity in the madness. Through it, she saw him, a shadow in the trees, a sniper taking aim at her father. She exhaled slowly, just as he had taught her. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The crack echoed. The shadow dropped. One shot, one life saved. But she didn't stop. Her hands steadied. Her breathing slowed. She became what her father had called an extension of patience. Every time she squeezed the trigger, another enemy fell. 2, 3, 4. 8 minutes passed. 12 shots fired. 12 enemies down. End. With each shot the tide of battle turned. The base that had been seconds from collapse found room to breathe. Soldiers regained courage. They pushed forward, reclaiming ground. And in the middle of it all, hidden behind the sandbags, a 17-year-old girl was rewriting her story. No longer just a kid. No longer the shadow no one believed in. She was the reason they were still alive. The gunfire slowed, then stopped. Smoke drifted over the base, curling into the night sky. What had been chaos minutes ago was now an eerie silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of burning debris. Emily lowered the rifle. Her hands were stiff, her shoulders aching, her heart still pounding like a drum in her chest. She blinked, realizing she had been holding her breath for nearly the entire fight. All around her, soldiers emerged from cover, dazed, battered, but alive. They looked at each other in disbelief. They had survived. Against impossible odds, they were still standing. And then their eyes turned toward the sandbag wall, toward the spot where a teenage girl knelt, her father's rifle across her lap, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavier than the gunfire. These were men who had trained for years, men hardened by service. Yet it wasn't them who had saved the base. It was the one they had dismissed, the one they had laughed at, the one they called just a kid. Colonel Davis, the same man who had once told her to stay back, finally stepped forward. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Carter, was that you?" Emily didn't answer. She just stared at the rifle in her hands, as if trying to understand what she had done. The colonel's jaw tightened. He raised his hand, and slowly, the soldiers around him began to clap. First one, then another, until the yard was filled with the sound of applause, not mockery, not laughter, respect. Her father approached, his eyes wet but his voice steady. He laid a hand on her shoulder and whispered words only she could hear. "You did what I always knew you could. You stood when no one else would." Emily's chest rose and fell. She wasn't sure if she was proud, or terrified, or both. But one truth was clear. In just 8 minutes, she had changed everything. The girl they had underestimated had become the hero they would never forget. The days that followed felt unreal. Reporters swarmed the base. Military officials wrote their reports in silence, each one unable to believe that a 7-year-old had changed the outcome of a battle. The story spread quickly, first through the town, then across the state, and soon across the entire country. Teenage girl saves military base with 12 perfect shots. The headlines were everywhere. Television anchors called her a prodigy. Veterans called her a warrior. And for the first time, people stopped saying just a kid. Emily hated the spotlight. She didn't want fame. She didn't want cameras shoved in her face or strangers chanting her name. All she wanted was to know she had done the right thing, that the lives saved that night mattered more than the whispers of doubt she had carried for years. One afternoon, as she stood quietly outside her home, her father handed her a folded piece of paper, an official letter, stamped with the seal of the White House. It was recognition from the president himself, a medal, an honor for courage in the face of impossible odds. Emily looked at it, then back at her father. "I don't need this," she whispered. Her father smiled softly. "I know, but you earned it, and now the world knows it too." The medal, the headlines, the applause, they were symbols. But the true reward came every time Emily looked in the mirror and no longer heard the words, "just a kid." Because on that night, in those 8 minutes, with 12 perfect shots, Emily Carter proved that courage has no age, no limit, no boundaries. She wasn't just a kid anymore. She was a hero. Remember this. Courage doesn't care about age, strength, or size. Sometimes the world will call you just a kid, until the moment you rise and prove you were so much more all along. If you believe courage can come from anywhere, hit subscribe and never miss a story like this again.